house where the Amityville Horror place is the most famous haunted house in America. And more things have happened there than haunted house in the United States. And so what I'm going to do is tell the true story of what has happened. What I'm going to do is tell the true story of what has happened in that house and the horrifying things the family had to endure when they moved in there.
I believe that houses definitely have residual energy in them. In a case such as the Amityville house, I think that having 6 murders take place there quite brutally, I think that there was a profound amount of malevolent and dark energy that was still lingering in the house when George and Kathy Lutz and family moved in there. So I think that they were driven out by this malevolent energy, and that was our opportunity to showcase that in the movie.
Before doing this movie, I believe that there's a lot of truth in what the Lutzes went through. And afterwards, my opinion stays the same. I was just playing a role. I never got too involved in the supernatural in the house that we were filming in. My opinion stays the same, and that is if they said it happened, I believe it happened.
The thing about ghost stories is they're perennial things, and I don't think you have to believe in them to get the value from them. Modern horror films function more as roller coasters than as explorations of the supernatural.
I remember being terrified reading that book as a kid.
It's been said that a horror film is only as good as its monster. You know, the Amityville house is one of the most recognizable monsters in all of horror films.
One day, Drew just kind of came into my office because Drew grew up in Long Island and in a very dramatic fashion had the DVD of the Amityville Horror and kind of threw it down on my desk and said, this is the next movie that we have to make. It had all the things that we look for in a film.
The best ghost stories ever written have really dealt with madness, the descent into madness, and they succeeded more because of that depiction than depictions of ghosts and monsters.
Oh, nice.
I never thought I was shooting a horror movie when I was doing this. I mean, Andrew Douglas and I had this sort of pact at the beginning that I would play the drama and he would shoot the horror movie, and he would take care of that. And because I don't know what that means if you say you're possessed in this moment or you're experiencing some sort of supernatural phenomenon. As an actor, I can't play that. So what I can show you is a person disassembling and having a psychological unraveling throughout the course of the movie. So that I can find.
I think she misses her daddy.
Give me back my daughter.
There are lots of boo scares, which are, frankly, a sound sting and a cut. And that's fine, but what I was interested in was scares that just kept on denying you. You know, they kept on holding off from the gratification, and then relaxed you, and then delivered a scare in the most unusual place.
It's a horror film, but it's about these characters. It's character-driven horror film. It's not about a slasher movie. And that's what I love about this movie. And okay, we show a lot more gore than the original, but it got me. I was scared, actually, in a couple of parts.
I mean, I'd like to think that the thing that is sustaining this film is actually that the actors are taking it out of just being a horror film into something you actually care about.
It's the key, trying to find actors or actresses that are just ready to make that break into bigger movies.
You know, I definitely wanted George to be as physically imposing as possible. I just want him to be a big sort of simian in nature, you know, this sort of house of a man that just, you know, the juxtaposition between he and these children was just immense as I could make it. So I wanted that to happen. I wanted him to look like he could walk through a wall if he had to and to get what he wanted.
There are certainly a few points with all our chase stuff in the house where Ryan can get pretty scary. Just because, you know, this guy chasing you with a gun, and you know the gun's rubber, and you know Ryan's not really going to hurt you, but it's still scary because he really sells it.
the kids in the movie, I really just, I kept it at arm's length the whole movie. I never really spent any time with those guys, and the reason was I didn't want to get close to them. I didn't want to fall in love with them. It just made my job harder.
And the kids were probably like, why doesn't he like me? And I realized that it's all very important for Ryan's craft was to really not get too close to them, because then when he has to abuse them, you don't want the kids to say, well, he was so nice before.
George, look what I found! Ryan, he hangs out with me a little bit because he's like, if I'm at work, he's already done with work, and when I'm at work, after that, he's at work, and sometimes we're like at the same time, and we barely see him.
And it's really difficult to be angry and abusive with children. As Ryan Reynolds, I was, you know, mortified that I had to do that, but, you know, I mean, I remember we were doing one in particular scene with Jesse James, and I was incredibly violent physically and emotionally with him, and they called cut, and I looked up and I noticed that the script supervisor and another crew member were crying, and I remember just thinking, wow, I mean, this triggers so much in some people.
Listen to me, I'm not gonna hurt you. I'm not gonna hurt you. You put your hands on it right now, okay? We're friends, we're having fun. Put your hands on it. Stop!
That's good! How do you sustain an implausible haunted house film for an hour and a half? And the only way you can do it is through the characterization. So Melissa had to do lots of things. She had to be a plausible mum. She had to be somebody who was so desperate to have this family that she would deny the very things in front of her face. And it was that layer of denial that she brought to the role.
To get the real tears and to get that sort of stress look and the nose running and the, you know, like that, you know, that you put yourself through a lot for that. So there's a bit of method, a lot of substitution. Just read about this man. Catch him. If I can't relate in a certain moment, I will substitute something that's similar that I've been through in my life, so I can sort of put it in context to how it could feel.
A day or two before we started rehearsing, Melissa took Jimmy and Chloe to Six Flags.
We went to Six Flags because they wanted us to bond. And when we went on this wet ride, once it got all wet, we all got all wet. It felt like she was my mom, really, because she was always really nice to me on set, too.
The toughest part for me in writing this movie was creating a character out of the little DeFeo girl who died. In the original Amityville Horror, that character doesn't exist. In those versions, there's a ghost by the name of Jody, and Jody is actually this sort of demonic pig. I presented this idea to my producers, and we all sort of agreed that instead of having a Jody the pig character, we would have a character, and that character was the youngest girl, and we changed her name to Jody because it really, you know, as a way of somewhat fictionalizing that character and that part of the story.
Once they get here, what we'll do is we'll finish that up, and then we'll do your neck later once you get your wardrobe, okay? Deal.
Jake has to, like, put veins, and I know my colors. What's that?
It's a ghost, just like you. It's Jody's ghost.
I slept in the chair for like an hour and a half while he was putting the makeup on.
And then they have Santa Claus. I'm seeing a snowman.
When I first saw the back of my head, I was like, what is that?
You want to show them the back of your head?
Well, theirs is pretty good. Well, that's where my friends are. Yeah.
Push.
Great, but I heard they shipped out the treats to know you.
I was like, ooh, that's cool. You did a great job.
There we go. Jody's here.
The makeup on this movie has been amazing, the special effects makeup. It's really brilliant, and it's very scary, and especially when you involve little kids. Little kids can be extraordinarily demonic. If you put them in the right makeup, in the right situation, they can be really scary.
Look what Ronnie did.
One of the most effective scenes in the original film was a scene that wasn't even in Anson's book. It was something that Sandra Stern created. That was a scene in which there was a babysitter who was sitting for the Letts children. And she was this sort of homely babysitter wearing a really hideous retainer. My idea for remaking that scene initially involved an equally homely babysitter, someone who looked very bookish. And I wrote that. And I showed it to the producers, and they said, "Are you out of your fucking mind?" They said, "This is an opportunity to have a smoking babysitter, you know? This is an opportunity to bring in someone who is the embodiment of every young kid's fantasy," and they were totally right, you know?
Sure, you don't want a babysitter?
Lisa had babysat for the DeFeos. She almost took the job, not because she wants to babysit, because that's obviously not something that she really enjoys doing, but she took the job to get back into the house.
Oh, you were way too young to hear this, so cover your ears.
She scares the kids. She's not a good babysitter. She's dying to tell the kids this story.
Don't listen. A rifle. Bang! 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 Bang!
Jody says you're a bad babysitter.
Yeah? Well, Jody's dead.
Is not.
That little shit got me fired.
Initially, they had made a rubber door that I was going to be able to use so that I could pound the heck out of it and be completely unfazed, not wounded at all. Well, of course, we get here and the rubber door didn't look real.
No, that's Jody's room.
Shh. That's not Jody's.
You're going to make her mad.
So we just went to town. I just went to town on the regular wood door and suffered some swelling and some bruising, but other than that, it was definitely worth it.
Come on, open the door! I can't.
Look, there's times with stunts that you don't feel safe, but on this film we had, you know, Kenny, who's a great stunt guy. I mean, he's probably the #1 in the world, and anything he says, you know that if he says this is safe, you know you can trust Kenny. And I felt very safe in his hands, and so did Chloe. He got up on that roof.
Kenny Bates is my stunt coordinator I've worked with for many years, and I've done a lot of stunts in my life, and I actually personally climbed up on that roof, and I'm scaling it. I mean, it is that steep, okay?
There was actually a plan B, and that was we're not going to have this shot in the movie. And plan A worked perfectly because of Kenny.
To Kenny's credit, he stayed with her until he could see that that was working. And that's a very refined skill, I think, because it wasn't just a technical exercise. He has the experience and the equipment to achieve that technically. What he had, in addition to that, was a kind of a sensitivity to fear and danger.
And the first thing I started doing with Chloe was I met her mother, met her brothers. We talked for a little while. I didn't rush her in anything. Found out what she liked, what she didn't like, and so I could strike a conversation with her.
That's good. Just walking like that, even slower. Try walking slower. That's where she really is.
Then I found out what Chloe was capable of. We put her on that little beam on the ground level and started playing a game and walking back and forth. And then we started spinning, and we made a game out of it.
Oh, okay. So this is how we're going to get you up to the roof next week, okay? Lean back for me.
They took me on a little plank of wood, and I walked on it, and they like held me up on my harness and made me a harness, and they told me how it would feel being up there. But it felt different when you were actually up there, because you got to see everything.
So if you're to fall, there you go. You didn't fall, did you? Okay, so step back onto it. Okay. Okay with that? Try fall again. There you go. So that's what it's going to be like up there, okay? So if anything happens.
We showed Chloe everything with a stunt double prior to doing anything with Chloe. I mean, we always had a stunt double standing by. The stunt double would do everything first. The stunt double was Laura Dash, and she would do everything before Chloe would do it. And she'd show her how to do it and what we were doing and make her feel comfortable. And she was like her teammate. I was more like a coach. In fact, Chloe would call me Coach Kenny. But with Chloe, I had to develop a trust. So what I did was, after we played the game and we had fun on a daily basis, I would grab her in between shots and I would take her over. There were times when I would stand her on a small step, and I'd have her close her eyes and drop backwards into my arms.
One, drop.
It is.
There. Got it.
After talking to her one day, I said, you know what we're going to do? We're going to run up in the Condor. We're going to take a ride up there. So I put her in the Condor, and I said, this is going to bounce around a lot. And I showed her how it bounced around. I took her for a ride up to the top, and I just let her look at it. And the reason was I wanted her to see that working environment before she actually went up there to do it.
In the cherry picker, we were so high up, we were next to the oak tree, and we picked acorns, and we made an acorn club with me and Melissa, and whoever we gave an acorn to, they were part of the acorn club.
The next time I took her up, we were going to hook her up. We put her in a harness, and we took her up to the roof. We were going to hook her up.
I was there that day right when we brought her up. Kenny Bates is in the basket, and we're waiting, and Kenny goes like this. He was looking right at me, and he came back down, and he goes, her lip was trembling, and then all of a sudden she started to do it, and she got more fun with it.
Hey, Richard?
Yeah?
Let's lock it.
How's the tension?
Little tension. That's good.
The overhead suspension rig for Chloe was a traveler on an endless, which means that there's an overhead cable trolley that has a line that drops down. There's a belly shiv. The traveler moves back and forth, and in between the traveler, there's a little belly in it, and there's a pulley on there. So as you let that line out, that drops down or lifts up. And that line is controlled by ground systems, by two guys on either end, and that'll lift her up and down. And the forward and back was controlled manually by two operators, which would bring her forward or back, and they all had an eye line on Chloe. That was the system that came down into a flying harness that was picked up both hips. For Chloe, the idea was to feel the tension, but to give her a little resistance, give her a few pounds of resistance so she knows it's there, but without her realizing it, she was actually walking with her own balance on the beam. I mean, if she wasn't, then it wouldn't be natural, her movements wouldn't be natural. She never had any idea that she was walking on a balance beam. As far as she was concerned, she was in a flying harness, and she was just walking and being suspended.
That was different because I had to walk on the roof, and it was really creepy. The first time it was creepy, but the second time it took me a few minutes to get used to it, because then I was like really cool because Kenny told me all about it.
The idea was never to put Chloe in a position where she wasn't comfortable with any of the elements. And if she wanted down, she was able to come down, and she knew she was in control, which eventually paid off because she did 90% of the work.
Hi, Mommy! Hi, Mommy! Look at me, Mommy!
Look at me, Mommy!
I've never been able to ask people to do things for me that I can't do myself, even though I have a pathological fear of heights. And, you know, on this dreadful day, I knew that I was going to have to get up in a condor and, you know, cover my camouflage and my fear in order to make this happen. I didn't have to do this, but I had to do it for myself. I had to do it because I was asking her to do it. And, but there's no way I could have done what she did.
Good job, Chloe.
Oh, great job.
Was it fun?
Was it fun? Great.
Was it fun?
So after lunch, we put
Yeah, you got it.
Andrew Douglas was a guy who we had determined was someone we wanted to work with long before we knew we were doing the Amityville Horror. He's an amazing artistic eye. We felt that he had the ability to bring this creeping dread to this house.
Andrew Douglas is extremely nice.
Be scared. You know that bit?
He, tells me what to do in a nice way.
At the end, I'm totally freaking you out. Are you paying attention?
He's cool because he plays the guitar, too.
I had this idea of starting a company to work with first-time directors, help them out. It's actually fun for me to give all the stuff I always wanted to know, to someone who's just starting out.
My background was photojournalism and photography, and then music videos into commercials, and then commercials in America. I'm not proven as a storyteller, even though the commercials I do are kind of little compressed stories.
They all say it's his first big movie, and I'm like, you can make 100 films, but it doesn't make you good with actors. You have to be a decent human being to be good with actors. You just have to relate to humans well, and he does that brilliantly.
And one more. The thing I didn't know was the directing performance. That's what I didn't know. I knew everything else. I knew how to move the camera through the air. I knew how to tell a visual story.
And action, kill it!
What was thrilling for me is when you feel as though even that process becomes collaborative, when you can be a mirror for that actor and you can see that you can actually help them. That was thrilling. That was like pure alchemy to me, and I'd never had that experience before.
Obviously, he has a very, very heightened and keen visual sense, but what I was amazed with him most was that was secondary to his awareness of emotion. I mean, the guy was just such a study of human nature. It was amazing.
I tended to talk about Alanis Morissette with Ryan. None of that is true. I talked constantly about where we are in the film, what happens next, what we've just seen. If there are lines that are bumping me, I tended to ask him about them because I didn't feel strong enough necessarily to always challenge lines, you know, challenge the writing. I didn't feel the confidence of it. If he agreed with them, it gave me confidence to kind of challenge or change lines. It was very often that.
Oh, Heavenly Father, Almighty God.
It's a funny scene to shoot when you get an actor of the caliber of Philip Baker Hall and who you've seen in some of your favorite films like Magnolia, and you have to say, Philip, you're a priest who is losing his faith. Yeah. Then you have to fall to the ground. Yeah. Then you have to roll around on the ground, flicking at your face as if there are flies. This was just a scary, scary moment.
And action.
That's a very game performance, isn't it, for a man in his, you know, later years.
One more. And cut there. Get it? Cutting.
It was the first question that Toby Jaffe asked me when I met him before I was invited to do the films. He said, if you do this film, Andrew, then make sure that you find the source of evil. And I just thought that was such a, you know, that's a kind of one-off thing to say. I'll not hear that many times in my life. And certainly, you know, from a writing point of view, I think that Scott Kozar was interested in tracking that idea beyond the original Amityville.
I'm Jennifer Williams. We're now in our art department, and I'm going to show you briefly how we start the process of design with our reference and how we go to our boards and how we actually translate that into a design. So we have here the ideas that we came up with for our red room, which is the follow-through from our basement. And so this was some of the reference that we came up with for the idea of what our tunnels and our red room would look like.
What do you do? Is that strong stuff to hold that?
Well, like you say, that's what I say. It's got enough tension, but I don't want to.
This is an autopsy laboratory, Victorian, where we've got a mass of tables. So it started off with having slabs where all the tortures would take place.
Seems like that audition was only yesterday.
And so this is the sort of transition. This is one of our cells with one of our torture characters. In our script, we have a lot of medieval torture. And so this was some of the early research that we discovered. Some very nasty things go on. But man's inhumanity to man.
And J. Get to move a little faster.
The scariest moments are moments that involve, you know, human horror. You know, not supernatural horror, but the horror that human beings are capable of.
This movie, even if it weren't based on a true story, works on so many levels. And I think that, you know, the fact that you're watching and you're thinking, wow, this actually did happen, is something that really heightens the experience, I think, for the moviegoer.
The afterlife, I think a lot of people wonder about it.
The film is a huge success. It seems to have legs, and it seems to have something that, other horror films don't necessarily have.
There's something that makes the haunted house genres endure, and endure with audiences. And I'll be interested to see how the haunted house genre is reinvented years from now,
A lot of people say they've experienced some sort of supernatural or a ghost or a haunted house. A lot of friends have told me. I've never had that feeling.
No, I didn't believe in ghosts.
I do. No.
You're supposed to say yes, even if you aren't, I think. So I'm going to go with yes.
Yeah, ghosts very well could exist.
If somebody were to tell me their house was haunted, I'd probably believe them.
In truth, I really don't.
I do. I think I even saw a ghost once.
I personally don't strongly believe in them, but that might change on my drive home.